And we have finally come to our fourth generation of the modern era. This is the current generation. We're actually still using the devices that we're going to talk about in modern computers to this day, and that is the microprocessor, or sometimes they just call that the CPU. In fact, most of the time, we just refer to this as the CPU. That stands for Central Processing Unit. Again, most people abbreviate that to CPU. So what I want you to know is it was in the early 1970s that the microprocessor, or CPU, I'll use the word CPU from now on, was first invented. Now, what is it? What's inside of it? Well, you might guess more transistors. Once again, this is not technically a new device from scratch, but it is taking the existing technology and further enhancing it. So basically, we learned in the we learned in the integrated circuits that they took all the transistors required to, let's say, do a simple addition, and they packaged it all together into one little chip. You can just drop in a chip. If you want to do a 16-digit number, you just drop in 16 of these chips in a row and you're done. And that was much, much better. The microprocessor goes a step farther. It takes all the math, all the transistors, all the chips required to do all math that a computer can possibly handle, and puts it in one package, one microprocessor. So they're basically further miniaturizing what the integrated circuit did. I do want you to know that the name of the company that first developed the microprocessor was Intel Corporation. They are still a leading, if not the leader, in the world of building CPUs in this current day. The first one had 2,300 transistors. So that little chip there you see on the screen, that's a picture of the very first microprocessor from the early 1970s. And they packaged 2,300 of those little transistors that did all the math that that entire processor could handle. All the multiplication, all the division, all the subtraction, all kind of math is built into that transistor at 2,300. Now, that was a lot for the early 70s. But as time goes on, they have increased the number of transistors, which allows the computer to do more, to become more powerful, as well as makes them faster because they're smaller. And I just to show you a quick image here of a modern ad for a computer, and you can see right here it has an Intel CPU inside of it. Now, the founder of Intel was Gordon Moore. I do want you to know that name. Gordon Moore made a statement back in the early 70s, and his statement became known as Moore's Law. So it's not technically a law like you'd see in chemistry, but it was a statement, it was a prediction. And he predicted that Intel would be able to double the number of transistors in each of their CPUs over every 18 months. So that means that in a year and a half later, they would have over maybe 5,000 transistors. And the next year, 10,000 transistors. Again, each generation made for a smaller device, but much more powerful device and a faster device. His law has pretty much held true until this day. If you look at this graph is pretty much linear, and you can see down here in the early 70s we had around 2,300. By the late, let's see if I can get rid of that little bar. There we go. By the late 1980s, we were already approaching 1,000,000 transistors. By the late 90s, we were over 10 to 50 billion, 50 million transistors. And as we got up into the 2010 range, we hit a billion transistors. Now, a modern day processor has anywhere between 3 to 10 billion transistors in each chip. So you can see how that law is still being applied. Some do say that the law is failing and is slowing down because they simply can't make transistors any smaller. Think about that. In a CPU, and I think this next image shows you kind of to scale how large these chips are. In a processor that size, they have fit over 5 billion of those little tiny transistors. Remember, let me remind you, the transistor has the 3 wires that one wire is controlling the current going through the other wire, and it can turn it on or off. It's acting as a on or off state. So we can have over 5 billion of these on or off states at any one time. So Intel is still the leading. They are slowing down as far as the number of transistors, but for the past 30, 40 years, it has held true. That's called Moore's Law. You will see that term again. So Moore's Law, named after Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel, still one of the leading companies that make microprocessors to this day. Now, I have a couple videos to show. One kind of oversimplifies the process of how a CPU is made, and then the second video shows kind of the manufacturing process in an actual video. And actually, I think there's a third one where it shows what people have to wear who work around these processors. So let me play this one. This is actually made by Intel, this video. It's about 2 or 3 minutes. So this is showing you how. I may narrate it because I don't think there's any narration in this video. CPUs start off with sand, which get turned into a silicon. You don't have to know the exact process of how these work. I think it's just interesting for you to kind of see how these are made and how complex. Some people have said that the CPU is the most complicated manufacturing process on Earth, and you can see in a moment. So they take the silicon, they kind of take a large cylinder of it, slice it up into individual discs. You take each disc, and they actually burn the circuitry onto the platter using kind of a form of photography. It basically kind of puts an image of the circuits, and you'll see an example of the circuitry in a moment. Remember, all those transistors, all billions of them, are burned onto the CPU with that photography process. Let's zoom in on one, and you can see an individual. This is an example of an individual that last disk, by the way, hundreds of CPUs are on that one. In fact, this next scene here, they're going to split them up. So you go from one disk, which is probably about 18 inches across, you take and split that up until you have, and you can pull out one individual chip. So you only need one for each computer. You can see the computer pulling out one individual, and you can see when it zooms in all the different pieces and transistors. Actually, I don't really show it too well. Package it, keep it protected, put some thermal protection around it to keep it from getting too hot, and that is what goes into a modern computer and your phones and tablets as well. In this next video, I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's about 10 minutes, but it also shows, it does show a better example of the circuitry. So let me see if I can fast forward to the actual circuitry. I've done it again. I put the video covering up the timeline, so I can't speed it up because it covered it. So let me just shrink the video down. Gotta stop doing that. Okay, let's see if we can fast forward this a little bit here. So here is the design. They designed a computer first, and all those wires are connected to transistors, and that is what was burned into the CPU on that previous video. Thousands, millions of wires connecting the billions of transistors. Let me fast forward. This is the actual process, or the manufacturing process. Everything is done using machines. The human eye can't see this small to build these. So these are all done. Let me fast forward a little bit further into. So this is an actual manufacturing facility. The CPUs are actually moved around the plant via a little automated system there, so that the humans never actually interact with them during the process. One of the reasons is because of dust. One piece of dust can destroy the entire disk of CPUs there, because one piece of dust would be larger than thousands of those individual transistors. You can see there's a real-life image of that platter with all those different circuits kind of burned into the chip. And it goes through many different steps. That last video oversimplified it. So you'll see the people working there are wearing what they call bunny suits, because they have to work in what's called a clean room. A clean room is, I think they said, like 3,000 times cleaner than a hospital operating room. And it's because of the dust. If dust gets into the manufacturing process, the whole disk is ruined. So they wear these bunny suits. In fact, I believe the next video we're going to see someone going to work and having to put one on. And I'm going to speed this up so that we can. Nope, it already is sped up. So he is going to put on a bunny suit. Starts with the can't increase the volume either. Kind of reminds you of a surgeon, basically, but actually more, almost more protective. Puts the mask on, puts the head dress on there. Completely covers all of your clothing, anything that you're wearing underneath. Little boots to cover all of his shoes, because shoes are very bad about dust. And I believe there's some gloves that he'll put on here in a moment. So he kind of inverted that so that he never actually touched the outside of the glove with his hands. And that is a bunny suit worn in any kind of manufacturing process that involves processors, namely Intel, which is by far the leader in CPU. So fourth generation, quick recap. Fourth generation is the CPU. It is the current generation. We are still using CPUs to this day. The first generation, the first microprocessor was built by Intel in the early 70s, had 2300. Modern day CPUs have over a billion transistors, as predicted by Gordon Moore, which is called Moore's Law. No Intel. You won't need really to describe the manufacturing process. I just wanted you to kind of see how that works. So we have now completed all 4 generations of the modern electric computers, and hopefully this has been interesting to see how we've progressed from the old days of vacuum tubes and computers that took up entire rooms to your phone, your tablet, that even things like your Fitbits and machines that are very small because of how small these transistors have become.